In this second episode, I once again have this setup with an Excel-like structure where I have a column with my names and each skill has been divided into 3 columns, which I want to combine. The output is going to be either this, where you have one column with name and one column with each skill, or the normal setup where you have a name column, a task column, and a skill level column. But I want to use more fun methods this time. I first want to promote headers, which is easily done with the GUI, to say use first row as header. I don't want this change type step. I also want to manually change the name of the first column. Next I want to extract the column names, because I need to transform them. The format is the same as before. I want to skip this first row using list.skip. Then I want to extract one value and skip 2 and keep going. I want to use list alternate, and my list is then list skip. I want to take the previous step and skip the first item. You don't have to add (1) here, but I do it to be more explicit. My pattern is then skip 2, extract 1, and I want to add an offset of 1 because I actually want to extract that first row, and then I skip 2 and extract 1. Right now I only have 3 skills, but this is what we expect. I then want to transform this list and turn it into a list of lists, where I want to take the column name and add the 3 skill levels. This is done with list transform, where my transformation is then to output a list, which is then going to be each, my list constructor, which is to grab the value and then append the skill level, and I need to do this 3 times. And now we have the list of lists. I then want to unpack this list of lists using my favorite function called list transform many. I want to go into that list. I don't want to apply a collection transformation, which is to change the values. That could be fixing casing, but we don't have to do that here. I simply want to output the value. My result transform then takes the form of outer, inner, and I simply want to output the inner value. That is, I want to unpack the list. And this gives me what I expect. I now have my new column names, which I then want to combine with my original column names, but I don't want to change that name column because I already have changed it. And I should remember to rename my step names. I want to use list.zip in order to combine my list and create a list of lists. So the function takes a list as lists. Like I mentioned, I want to skip the first column name of my original column names because I've already changed the first column. And again, I want to make it explicit that I only want to skip the first, so this isn't necessary. And then I want to grab the transform many step, which was actually my previous step. This then generates a list of lists, which is the format used in table.rename columns. We can then take that list and use it in table.rename columns as mentioned. And the table is then the rename column step, and my renames as lists is then the previous step. Now we've already fixed the column headers. I can then remove the first row because we actually never needed it. I then need to deal with changing the X by conditionally replacing the X with a value based on the column name. And I got the idea for that from this guy Alexis Olsson in this post on the Microsoft forum. I want to first create a Lambda function, which will simply make the code a bit easier to read by putting my Lambda function outside of the code. I want to define that Lambda function, which is then a function which takes the column as an argument, and then if text contains, if the column header contains the word bad, then I want to output bad. If the text contains alright, then I want to output that. Else I want to output Superman. Since I personally made sure my columns contain one of these words, I can simply put the Superman as the last condition, rather than making 3 conditions. As mentioned, I want to use transform columns, which then takes, and it doesn't want to give me IntelliSense because I forgot to write in. I want to change the previous step, and it doesn't feel like giving me IntelliSense. The table.transform columns function takes this transform operations as list. I'm going to pass it in a list of lists, meaning that I want to create one list for each column, which conveniently I can do because I already have a list with all the column names that I want to change, and I can use list.transform to change that list of column names into my transform operation. And this is what Alexis showed, meaning I want to use list transform. I want to go into the transform many step, and my transform operation is then column name, which goes towards, and then need to output a list, which follows the syntax of column name, comma, transformation, and then optionally a column type. Since I'm iterating over the transform many list, which is the list of headers, my first output is then the column name argument, and then my transform operation is, if the value in the column is equal to X, then I want to replace that using the Lambda function. Meaning that in this first column, I have the word bad in the column header, which means the X is replaced with the word bad, which we already defined in the Lambda function. In the case where the value is null, then I'm not doing a transformation because the underscore isn't equal to X. And then I want to add the type. I want to say otherwise, that is, if the value isn't equal to X, then I simply want to output the value itself. and then I want to output the type of text. And that is actually everything. Now we've already made a conditional transformation based on the column header. I can now unpivot my other columns and the name column, which then gives me my task in the first column and the skill level in the second column. But I'm not entirely done because I now want to get rid of that suffix. Because I assume that you want the format where you have one column with the task and one column with the task level, meaning I no longer need that suffix. And I can solve that with the method I used previously, which is to transform columns and then remove whatever is after the last instance of the space. Here we have tasks with a space, so I want to remove everything after the last space. Usually when I replace values, I prefer using the GUI to give me the function. My function is then to extract the value in the current row, and my new value is then going to be, I want to grab the text that is to the left of the last instance of the space, which I can do with text before delimiter, where my text is then the underscore, my delimiter is a space, and my index is then going to be the 0 index, and then I want to use relative partition from end. And I forgot that when you use table.replaceValue, the underscore actually refers to the current row and not the current intersection between the current row and the current column. Here in the last argument I specify I want to transform the value in task, but I can't say underscore here. I need to specify that I want to go into the task column and grab the current value. And then I also need to do it here. Now I'm saying for each row of my table, I want to replace the value in the task column, and that replacement should then be grab the value in the current row's task column, and then I want to replace that with use text.before delimiter, grab the text to the left of the last position of a space. And now I'm done. And if you want to, you can then choose to pivot this further. And if you want to do like in this solution where I wanted one column for each task, we can do that by using the pivot function to say that my values is then the skill level and I don't want any aggregation. We get one column for each skill, but this is optional. If you're like me and you don't like pivoting or unpivoting, there's a way to avoid using the unpivot function, which uses my second favorite function, list accumulate, so I want to do that. If you go back to this previous step, which I should actually rename, where I change the x to a value based on the column header, where I want to combine the 3 columns related to the specific task, combine that into one column, I can do that, and I can do that because I already have this list. I first want to combine the 2 lists, because that makes it a bit easier to follow along. I want to take the list, extract every third, and I want to combine that with this inner list where I added the skill level, because the first value is then what I want the column to be named, but I have the values spread across these 3 columns. So I want to use list zip once more, and then zip extract every third with the inner list step. Now we have a list of lists where the second value is itself a list. Now we can avoid pivoting by using list accumulate instead. I want to use list accumulate and accumulate over this list of lists. And my seed value is then going to be this step where we replace the x. My accumulate is then going to be state, current as always, which goes towards, and it doesn't want to give me indentation. I want to combine columns where the table I want to affect is then the state. The source columns is then the second item inside of my list. Yes, those are the 3 columns I want to concatenate. My function is then going to be, I want to output this as text, and it's then simply going to be, I want to combine the values. But I know that my column has 1 value and then 2 nulls. When I use text combine to combine texts where some of them are null, it simply removes it. So that's very convenient. Then the column name should be go into the current and grab the first value. And then that solves everything. So I wouldn't recommend this solution because it uses a looper with list accumulate, and it's a lot easier to use table.pivot. But I personally don't like pivoting because it confuses me. So this is an alternative. In any case, you probably want to have this output table because it has 1 column for name, 1 for task, and 1 for skill level. But you may possibly want to have 1 column per skill. That would be convenient if you're outputting this in Excel, and a person can simply add a filter here to say, well, I only want to find people who are alright at this specific skill. And then I can see, okay, maybe they're really good at another skill, so I should prioritize making people do what they're great at rather than what they're okay at. But again, that all depends on what your output is. This format is better for data analysis and making graphs. This might be preferable in Excel if you want employees or managers to do something with the data. But in any case, yep,